Hello and welcome back. In this lecture, we are going to add few more environment variable types in our serverless YAML file. For example, we will see how we can refer to serverless core variables and set them as environment variables in serverless YAML using SLS colon notation. We will also see how we can refer to other CloudFormation stacks that we have already deployed under the same account. We will also see how we can fetch values for some key that we have set in our S3 bucket. This key is nothing but a file that we have in our S3 bucket. It could be a simple text file or JSON file. Then we will also see how we can convert our string environment variables into Boolean type. For example, in some cases you might have string values set in SSM store, but in your code you want the values to be, for example, true or false. So we will also see how we can achieve that. So let's go back to our code. So let's try to refer to standard serverless framework variables, core variables in our YAML file. For example, SLS variable, and set the value to SLS core variable. For example, instance ID. I can also refer to AWS standard variables for account level. You can name it AWS variable. Now, one of the example of an AWS account level variable is account ID, so I can use that. Now let's refer to these two variables in our code. So I'll go back to user.js file. I'll just copy this, create two more entries, and I want to display the SLS variable, and then also the AWS variable. That's it. Let's go to our console. Now from my CLI, I just want to invoke my function locally. So it's invoke local function. The function name is user, and then provide some data. So we have the output, and there we can see we have the SLS variable set to the instance ID, and then AWS variable is set to my AWS account ID. Now under my S3 buckets in my AWS console, I have created a bucket called SLS variables, and then under this bucket I have a variable 1.txt file which acts as my key under the bucket, the file name. And if I open the file, inside the text file I just have variable 1 as the value. Now I want to refer this value as my environment variable value in serverless YAML file. Now in my serverless YAML file, I can have S3 variable, and I can set the value of this environment variable by referring to my S3 bucket and then the path to the key. So it will be my bucket name slash the file name. So we are referring to S3, and then inside my S3 I'm referring to my path to the key, so which is my bucket name slash the file name. The value for S3 underscore variable should be set to the text inside variable1.txt, and this s3 variable is available in our function. So let's go to our user.js. Let me just copy this, paste it, and change it to s3 variable. Let's go back to my CLI, and again I just want to invoke my function. Okay, so here we can see that the value of our environment variable s3 underscore variable is set to the content of the file inside our s3 bucket, which is variable1. Now, how do we refer to resources from other CloudFormation templates that we have under the same account? I'll go to my CloudFormation. So we have our project deployed as project tgg2-dev. What if I want to use one of the resource from this stack? Now this stack is under the same account. I can do this by referring to this CloudFormation stack name, which is project tgg sample-dev, and then one of the outputs. Now under the outputs we have key and values. Now under this sample project, if I want to pick the gateway URL or the service endpoint URL for this project and use it in my project tgg2 project, which is my current project, I need to refer to the key service endpoint here. Now how do we do that? So let's go back to our serverless YAML. I'll name a new variable, or I'll just name it CloudFormation service endpoint. Now I want to set this value to another CloudFormation stack, so I'll use CF notation colon, and then I need to give the name of the other stack, which is project tgg sample-dev dot the key that we want to fetch the value for, service endpoint. So my CF service endpoint will have the value of service endpoint, which is this URL under this other project. Let's save it, go to user.js, and as usual I'll just copy it and change the name of variable. That's it. Let's go to our CLI and try to run the function once again. So you can see that now our Lambda function is able to fetch one of the values, output values from another CloudFormation stack. In our next example, we will see how we can convert a string value to Boolean value while creating our environment variables. So if I go back to my code, let's go to serverless YAML file. I want to create another variable called string to Boolean. Now I have created a parameter store value called enable debug in my console. Now I've created another value here in my parameter store called enable debug. Now the type is set to string and the value that I have set is 1, right? I want to refer to this value 1 from parameter store while creating an environment variable in my serverless YAML file. So I can do that using our previous example, something like that. We'll go to SSM and then refer to my new variable. Now if I set this value directly without converting it into a boolean, the value 1 will be assigned to a string to pool as a string, but we want to convert that string value to a boolean value, which is true or false. So what we can do here is we can use the function called string to bool and then pass this SSM value as parameter. Now if I refer to this string to boolean in my lambda function here, now this time I don't need to change it into a string, so I'm just gonna output this value. Now this should be a boolean value, so 1 as a string, if we convert it into a boolean value, it should return true. So when we test it, okay, looks like I made a mistake. Let's go back to code. Okay, this should be, oh, so it will be curly braces, then bracket, and then next curly brace. Let's test it again. There you go, you can see that string to bool value is converted into a boolean value. And if I remove this function here, and test it again, we should get the value as 1. There you go. So it's not converting the value to boolean. So in some cases you might want to store your parameters as a string, but in our code we need the value to be 1, the value to be converted into a boolean value like true or false. So in those cases this function comes in handy. So that's it for this lecture, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.